It's a play about men. It's literally a play about a patriarchy. It's a play about how men contrive to pass power and money on to each other, especially within families.
I see Kerry Packer as the ultimate alpha male. Australia's almost a grotesque example of the extremes of Australian masculinity.
Sort of panoramic view of power and the influence of what happens in boardrooms and how that filters out through the city and the nation.
It's the kind of space where you could hose it down and the kind of muck and grime and blood and guts would wash away and filter down a drain and you wouldn't know what had happened there.
We begin in the 90s at a moment of possible transition between father and son, really. And then the play jumps back a couple of decades to the 50s, where we meet young Kerry Packer. I'm Eamon Flack, and I'm the artistic director of Belvoir, and I'm directing Packer and Sons. There's a sense that this is a play about kings and princes and about rival kingdoms and the kind of mythological qualities of those families, the Packers and the Murdochs, and the rivalry and what it takes to grow a young boy into the inheritor of a business empire.
The first impulse for Packer and Sons came when my father was quite ill. My father had dementia and I lost him. And the idea sort of began, I had an inkling for this at that time because I was obviously reflecting on love, paternal love at that time. And I imagined what it might be like to have a struggle for paternal love. I think that was the first inkling for Packer and Sons. I'm Tommy Murphy, and I'm the playwright for Packer and Sons. I see Kerry Packer as the ultimate alpha male. Australia's sort of a grotesque example of the extremes of Australian masculinity. And that fascinates me. I wanted to tell a story now about the patriarchy. I wanted to tell a story about male entitlement. And so to have this supreme example of the Australian alpha male at the heart of a story seemed like a really good vehicle to do that. The Packers are so fascinating. There are so many episodes, there are so many anecdotes that you hear about why they are such a spectacular, powerful group of people. To tell the story across a 2-act play, you need a focus. And from the outset, the focus of Packer and Sons has always been a story about fathers and sons. It's always been the idea to tell a story about cycles of patriarchal brutality and how one generation inherits more than fortune from the generation above. What else is passed down?
I mean, James Packer is the fourth Packer to have kind of ruled this massive business empire. And it's an empire that has kind of grown and changed along the way. But for the bulk of the empire's life, this business empire, it was a media empire. And it was really, in many ways, forming the mainstream of Australian culture. And so it wielded incredible political power, incredible editorial power. Like at their height, these men were able to influence policy absolutely to serve their private business interests in a very, very direct way.
Packer and Sons is a kind of origin story, and it arrives at James Packer, but it goes right back and begins with Sir Frank Packer and his fathering of Clyde, his eldest son, and Kerry, who is presumed to be the idiot son. He's presumed to be living in the shadow of his more ambitious and intellectual brother, Clyde. We watch his rise. We watch how Kerry goes from that position as idiot son to taking the crown. And then we look at what Kerry is then as a father to his son and whether he might refuse that ascension to the prince below him.
Really kind of has an atavistic quality that throws us back into the mythical realm. But the kind of, to tell that sort of story about men in that way and have a lens on it, a view on it, that means that we can actually kind of begin to think about how power functions in these ways is kind of great. So the mix of the mythological and the contemporary lens, I think, is really exciting.
I'm noticing the conversations in rehearsal as the actors are unpacking who these people are that they're going to embody, that a lot of the discussion is around what it takes to be a successful operator in business. And to be truly successful in business, do you have to stifle your humanity? To be good in business, does it mean that you have to be able to take from others at any cost? I was really interested in telling a story about the patriarchy, and as the play developed, I did try to account for the Packer women, and they're a crucial part of that family. I believe that there is a play about the Packer women that can be written. I don't think I'm the playwright to write it. And in the focus of this play about the transitions of power between men, I was writing. I think it's safe to say that part of my reasons for writing this play is about my own queer outrage about the extremes of Australian masculinity. I feel like I've been both an insider and an outsider to Australian masculinity, so I'm in a good place to observe it. So this is a story about entitlement. It's about male power, and it takes place in rooms where the women have been excluded. The play by no means tries to endorse that chauvinism, but it does try to account for it, and it wants to scrutinise it. I hope that right now is a very good time to be telling stories about brutal, bullying men in power. That's what we're taking aim at.
When I first read it, I was really struck by the specificity of the material in terms of the research that he had undertaken quite extensively in terms of forming the work. My name is Louise Gough. I am head of new work at Belvoir. I was very struck by the muscularity and the masculinity in the writing, and the intention, I think, undergirding the work, this conversation that I was seeing happening around both the sort of panoramic view of power and the influence of what happens in boardrooms and how that filters out through the city and the nation, specifically Australia. And then really, I use this, it's a bit of a joke, but I talk about how do you make a scene betterer. And so the task was putting aside the research and putting aside the public record, not in a way that deviates from this sense of truth, but what is the task of that character in this scene. And often where the conversation led and the exploration led, it wasn't so much what do we know about this publicly, it is what happens between this father and this son in this moment. What happens when a son feels distant? What happens when a father doesn't afford his son the space in order to become his own man? What happens when a son challenges a father about being the next in line? So it was about the human, the points of conflict, and the stakes attached to that conflict. So the real bones of dramatic storytelling in a sort of humanist work.
When I first read Packer and Sons, what struck me the most was the nature of these men's bodies and the way they are sort of leaky and they're sort of deliquescing on the inside, the ill health of these men. And something about their internal matter just desperately holding on to power and what that does to their insides in a way, and also what legacy that holds for their sons and their sons. Hi, my name's Romanie Harper. I am the set and costume designer on Packer and Sons. So I was really struck by the visceral nature of their physical leakages, I suppose, and the kind of guts of it. So there's something sort of cold about it, and it's the kind of space where you could hose it down and the kind of muck and grime and blood and guts would wash away and filter down a drain and you wouldn't know what had happened there. So it's cold and sort of harsh and brutal, but also refuses to be defined as any particular place. There's a large glass wall that sort of feels like it could be in an office kind of space, but it also sort of jumps away from that by having a sort of linoleum floor, more like an edge, so that no grime gets stuck in the corners. So that coving detail came out of talking about places where these deals go on, or conversation kind of high-powered people might have. So we were talking about locker rooms and saunas and those sort of sites of power, and those places being sort of wet areas and a place where like you want to be able to just like hose it down.
We're staging Packer and Sons now when there's this casino growing on the side of our city, and that casino has been brought into question with its business practices. There's going to be an inquiry into that at the time that we're going to stage. The play is by no means about the Crown Barangaroo casino development, but it does point a finger to it. It's a kind of origin story of how we got there.
Right now, the big men are back. The way that the election of certain figures has licensed a certain kind of behaviour really feels to me like we're in the age of the arsehole in a massive way. There's a particular kind of assumption of power and a kind of version of masculinity in which this is the proper way of being a man, is to wield this sort of extremity of power and to feel like everything has to kind of bow down and revolve around you. I think we had all hoped that that era had passed, but it's back.